Welcome back to our second session, this time with Abby Gamble and Alex Batchen from the Department of Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy. So let me hand over to them now.
Thank you. Okay, I'm going to share our slides. I'm hoping you can all see those now, but do let us know if you can't, and I can reshare them. So as just been introduced, my name's Abby Gamble, and one of my colleagues, Alex Batchen, is also on the call, and we both work in the Department for Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy. We're going to provide a bit of an overview today of what businesses need to do to continue placing goods, and particularly new approach goods commonly identified by the CE marking on the Great British, Northern Ireland and EU markets from the 1st of January 2021. This presentation is going to mainly focus on the Great British market, so we're talking about Scotland, England and Wales, as there are some slightly different rules that apply to Northern Ireland under the Northern Ireland Protocol. However, we will cover Northern Ireland towards the end of the presentation, and happy to take some more questions on that if you do have some. So the first thing to note is there is different guidance depending on what regulation applies to your goods. To ensure you are following the right guidance for your products, you need to just make sure you know exactly which regulations apply. Firstly, and what we're going to focus on today, is new approach goods. So there are some examples on the slide here, toys, machinery, and which can most commonly be identified by the CE marking, although there is some different markings for some new approach goods. There are also some slightly different rules for some new approach goods, such as medical devices, products requiring eco-design and energy labelling. And these will not be covered today, and would really recommend that if your good does fall into some of that sector-specific guidance, you check the guidance on gov.uk, where there's lots more information. And again, we're happy to take questions via email on those specific sectors. Next, you have old approach goods, which we're not going to focus on today. So these are goods which are covered by standalone regulations, and some examples include cars and medicines, and there's some others on the slides. Any changes for these goods will be quite specific to what you're selling. And again, lots of guidance is on gov.uk for those. And then finally, we've got non-harmonised goods. So these are things such as furniture and foodstuffs. For these goods, there will no longer be mutual recognition between Great Britain and the EU. You will need to meet the requirements for the first member state that you are exporting to for these goods. Only then can your non-harmonised goods move freely within the EU. So again, if you're unsure about this, do check the gov.uk guidance. So now moving on to the main part of the presentation. So this is around placing new approach goods on the Great British and EU markets. The first important thing to note that if you've already placed your CE mark goods on the UK market, including Northern Ireland at this point, or the EU market, before the end of this year, so before the 1st of January 2021, then you do not need to take any action for these goods. These can continue to circulate freely until they reach their end user. And we often then get questions around what exactly we mean by having placed it on the market. So in terms of scope, when we're talking about this, we're referring to individual products, not a type of product. It applies when an individual good is made available for the first time on the market, and that individual good must have been fully manufactured, and there needs to be an offer or agreement to transfer it. Proof of this placing on the market is usually done on the basis of a contract of sale, an invoice, or shipping documents are prime examples. So then if we move on to placing good on the Great British market after this date, so we are really actively encouraging businesses to start using the UKCA marking and meeting those UK requirements as soon as possible after the 1st of January 2021. However, we do understand that it's been a very challenging year, and to allow businesses some time to adjust, CE marked goods that meet EU requirements can continue to be placed on the Great British market until the 1st of January 2022 in most cases. And this is actually longer for certain goods. So again, just referring you guys back to the gov.uk website for certain sectors such as medical devices. This is true whether you are self-certifying for the CE mark or where you're using an EU notified body for mandatory third-party conformity assessment. However, if you do have a certificate of conformity from a UK body, you will have to use the UKCA marking from the start of next year, so from the start of 1st of January 2021, unless you have transferred it to an EU body ahead of that date. Another really important point to note here is around existing stock. So this is something just to be aware of. And again, we get lots of questions directed at our team about this. So if your good was fully manufactured and ready to place on the Great British market before the 1st of January 2021, so for example, if you are storing it, you do not need to use the UKCA marking, even where that certification was carried out by a UK-based body. This sentence that I've just said will only apply to goods being placed on the Great British market and only until the 31st of December 2021. So again, from that 1st of January 2022 date, that UKCA marking will need to start being used in most cases. To note, there's not really much to say on placing goods on the EU market, but there aren't transitional measures for placing those goods on the market. So you must take those steps to ensure compliance with EU requirements by the 1st of January 2021. And we'll come on to more about that over the next few slides. So now we're looking at product markings. So the UKCA marking comes into effect from the start of next year, so you can start using it from that date. A key point to note is that from the 1st of January 2021, the essential requirements and standards that can be used to demonstrate compliance to the UKCA marking will be the exact same as they are now for the CE marking. That's not to say they won't diverge in the future, but from that 1st of January date, the requirements you need to be meeting for your goods are the same. The UKCA marking will be mandatory for most goods from the 1st of January 2022. And as I've mentioned previously, there are some exemptions to this, that it may be longer, and that's an example is medical devices. You may also need to start using it sooner, you can also start using it sooner than the 1st of January 2022, and that's something we are actively encouraging, especially with lead-in times to make those changes. There is another transitional measure here, and that is that until the 1st of January 2023, you can affix the UKCA marking using a label or an accompanying document. So from the 1st of January 2023, the UKCA marking must in most cases be affixed directly to the product. And again, we often get questions around this. The rules for applying the UKCA marking will be the same from the 1st of January 2023 as they are currently for the CE marking. So we are aware that under certain legislation for certain goods, there may be provisions that mean it does not need to be applied directly to the product, whereas for others, it has to be indelibly on the product. So from the 1st of January 2023, those are the rules that will apply for applying the UKCA marking. But just to reiterate, for 2 years from the 1st of January 2021, so until 2023, there is that provision that means you can apply the UKCA marking across all directives via a sticky label or an accompanying document. A point to note here is that when you are using the UKCA marking, you will also need a UK declaration of conformity. The information required on this document is largely the same as for your EU declaration of conformity, but you just need to refer to the UK legislation rather than the EU legislation, and lots of detail, not only on the declaration of conformity, but about that legislation change can be found on gov.uk. Another point to note is that all harmonised standards currently recognised as giving rise to presumption of conformity will continue to will become UK designated standards. So all harmonised standards will become UK designated standards, and they will play the same role as they do now in the EU and the UK at the end of the transition period, so from the start of next year. Something we get asked a lot about is about applying the UKCA and the CE mark to your product. And just to highlight, you can place both markings on your product if it's going to be destined for both the Great British and EU markets, so long as that product meets both the relevant regulatory requirements for both markets and neither marking impedes the visibility of the other. So this next slide just goes over some of those key dates. As I understand, it's a lot of 2020 somethings and a lot of 1st of January. So just to recap, from the start of next year, the UKCA mark will be recognised as demonstrating compliance for the Great British market. The UKCA marking is mandatory from this date if the certificate of conformity is issued by a UK approved body. So UK approved bodies will only be able to issue the UKCA marking from this date. The UKCA marking will be mandatory for most products from the 1st of January 2022, although there are some exceptions. And until the 1st of January 2023, the UKCA marking can be affixed via a label or on an accompanying document rather than on the product itself. After this date, the UKCA marking must be affixed directly to the product where this is required by its legislation. This next part of the presentation goes on to conformity assessment bodies, but more specifically about the mandatory use of third-party conformity assessment bodies. If you currently self-certify for the CE mark, you will be able to continue to do so for the UKCA marking. So this slide won't really apply to you. And similarly, if you use a body on a voluntary basis where it's not required under the conformity assessment modules that you're choosing to apply, then you will also not be impacted by this slide. So this is something just to highlight. All UK-based notified bodies will automatically become UK-approved bodies from the 1st of January 2021. We've recently launched our own database where these bodies can be found, and this is called the UK Market Conformity Assessment Bodies, or UKMCAB. Again, this can all be found on gov.uk. If your product requires third-party conformity assessment, this must be done by a UK recognised body for most products from the 1st of January 2022. So that's that same time in which the UKCA marking will become mandatory for most goods. However, the essential requirements and standards used to demonstrate compliance with the UKCA marking will be the same, as I've said before, as they are now for the CE marking, and that also then relates to the conformity assessment procedures that products must undergo for the UKCA marking. The EU will also no longer be recognising UK bodies from the 1st of January 2021. So if your certificate is currently with one and you want to sell to the EU, you will need to transfer it ahead of this date. This slide is just reminding businesses what they need to be doing now. So if you are using any conformity assessment bodies and plan to place goods on both the Great British and EU markets, there are a couple of things I want to remind you to do. The first is you should be contacting your notified bodies, and I hope that for many of you, you've already started that process as soon as possible to understand your options for conformity assessment for both the Great British and EU markets. And we're also, again, really encouraging the use of the UKCA marking and the preparation for using the UKCA marking as soon as possible. And we'd really like that to be your takeaway message from this presentation. And that will include requiring separate certificates for both the Great British and EU markets to be ready well in advance of the 1st of January 2022 for most products. There often may be a requirement for some reassessment of your good if it does require third-party conformity assessment, and it may take just some lead-in time for that second certificate to be issued. So we really would encourage you to start preparing as soon as possible, and if you've got questions about that, more than happy to take those via the Q&A. So next we are moving on to legal responsibilities for new approach goods. So this is moving away from conformity assessment, and again applies to everyone, whether you self-certify and use the bodies on a voluntary basis or on a mandatory basis. If you currently distribute EU goods or you have your goods distributed by someone in the EU, you may acquire some new legal duties. These changes will come into force from the 1st of January 2021. Okay, so that's really important date to remember for those legal responsibilities. The key change to be aware of and that we try and highlight through these presentations is that some Great British-based distributors of EU goods may become importers and vice versa. And it's this importer, the change of responsibility of you becoming an importer rather than a distributor, that has some significant legal changes and responsibility changes. An importer is a person or business that is based in the UK who first places a good on the Great British market from a country outside of the UK. You'll have seen in that sentence I use both UK and Great British, and this is again really important to note that an importer can be based in Northern Ireland for the Great British market. But again, we'll recap that when we start moving on to Northern Ireland a bit later on in the presentation. In general, importers do have more responsibilities than distributors. An importer, for example, will need to indicate their name and address on the product or documentation, keep a copy of the Declaration of Conformity, and ensure the technical documentation can be made available to enforcing authorities upon request. Until the 1st of January 2023, for most CE marked goods being placed on the Great British market, this additional address can go on an accompanying document rather than on the product itself. After this date, you will need to comply with the legislation that's relevant to you. This is quite similar to the provision we have around applying the UKCA marking via sticky label. So just to reiterate at that point, that we do understand that legislation is different for certain goods. So we'd really encourage you to check your legislation for your particular good around the importer requirements, because these do differ between products. For batches of goods, you can provide your contact details on a document accompanying the whole batch rather than each individual good, so long as that document follows each batch through the distribution chain. It's key that your contact details must follow each product, but not necessarily on a document per product basis. Ultimately, what is really important here and what we're trying to stress through this presentation is that the end user, each distributor and the regulator must be able to access the information and the traceability for that product to ensure that traceability is ensured. And that's all about the product safety and market surveillance aspect of this. Alongside these details, but most important to note here, not as an alternative to those importer details, you can use your company website to provide more information, access to product details, and contact points for retailers, consumers, and enforcement bodies. So that can help with traceability, but it's not a substitute. So this is a legal requirement for your good around importer responsibilities. From the 1st of January 2021, all authorised representatives for the Great British market must be based in either Great Britain or in Northern Ireland. We tend not to stress about this point too much in this presentation, as the appointment of authorised representatives is generally optional for most new approach goods. But if you do have questions, because your good requires an authorised representative, happy to take those via the Q&A. Also to note, this applies the other way round, and Great British authorised representatives will also no longer be recognised in the EU, and they must be based in either the EU 27 or in Northern Ireland. To highlight here, if you are exporting to the EU, there is a regulation that comes into force next year from the 16th of July 2021, and this is on market surveillance and compliance of products, that will require you to have an EU representative. And just to note, this does still include representative based in Northern Ireland, if you have no other economic operator in place. So an example of this would be if you sell your goods directly to an end user, so there is no importer for that good, then this requirement would come into force. Currently, the Great Britain don't have a plan to introduce this into legislation, and that doesn't mean that it won't happen in the future, but it is important to note that from the 1st of January, certainly from July 2021, this will not be coming into force. So that takes me to the end of that bit of the presentation, and we now move on to the Northern Ireland market. So up to now, we have focused on Great Britain, and now we're going to look at placing goods specifically on the Northern Ireland market. An important point to note here, because we often get questions that we are unable to answer here, is that this won't cover customs requirements or anything around customs. And again, would really encourage you to contact the relevant government department about that, but can happy to take away questions if you do have one. Just to note, this won't cover that. So the Ireland or Northern Ireland Protocol applies from the 1st of January 2021. And to note here that this comes into force regardless of any UK-EU free trade agreement. And to note that this whole presentation we've spoken to you today It's all stuff that needs to be in place, regardless of the negotiation outcome. The purpose of this Northern Ireland Protocol is to avoid a hard border between Northern Ireland and Ireland. From a goods regulation point of view, the key thing to note about this protocol is that Northern Ireland will remain in regulatory alignment with the EU. So, in other words, goods will need to meet the EU regulatory requirements to be placed on the market in Northern Ireland for as long as the protocol is in force. This is due to the fact that Northern Ireland will continue to align with EU rules. This means the CE marking will continue to be the relevant conformity marking for most new approach goods. You will need to use the CE marking if you currently self-certify and are going to be placing your good on Northern Ireland, or if you are using an EU notified body to carry out conformity assessment for the Northern Ireland market. You may or are likely to be aware of this UKNI marking. You can see a picture of that on the slide here. So the UKNI marking is a new additional conformity marking for products being placed on the market in Northern Ireland from the 1st of January 2021. The key point to note here is that you will never apply this by itself. It will always accompany an EU conformity marking. For example, the CE marking. It is only for goods which have undergone mandatory third-party conformity assessment by a body based in the UK. So here, where a body's been based in the UK bodies will usually be using the UKCA marking and certifying to that, but they will also be able to certify for the CE UKNI marking where relevant. It's important to note that goods that bear just the UKCA marking alone will not be valid for the Northern Ireland market, but it can be present on goods that also are displaying the correct conformity assessment marking for the Northern Ireland market. So you will need to apply the CE UKNI marking if you are using a UK body for mandatory third-party conformity assessment. This is to ensure that goods assessed by UK conformity assessment bodies don't end up on the EU market, as the EU will not be recognising the conformity assessment bodies from the UK. The point here is that when a UK body is applying the UKNI CE marking, the rules it is following for that conformity assessment are the EU rules. So even if those EU rules have diverged, that marking will still be allowed via UK bodies, but they will be testing to those requirements. Regardless if you apply the CE marking alone, so for example, if you're self-certifying or using that EU notified body, or if you're using the CE UKNI marking, you should continue to use an EU declaration of conformity. And again, the reason for this is that the requirements that good is meeting are EU requirements, even when assessed by UK bodies. This next slide looks at placing qualifying Northern Ireland goods on the Great British market. So qualifying Northern Ireland goods marked with the CE or the CE UKNI marking can be placed on the Great British market under unfettered access for as long as the protocol is in force. This is the case even if Great British and EU rules diverge. The definition here of a qualifying Northern Ireland good is any good which is in Northern Ireland and not under customs control, or a good which is being processed in Northern Ireland. We will be publishing further guidance explaining more details on qualifying goods in more detail in the new year. So unfettered access only applies to goods that are made by Northern Ireland and Irish businesses. To prevent any traders seeking to abuse the system, it will be accompanied by an anti-avoidance provision in law that enable action to be taken where a business looks to reroute their goods to avoid import formalities. This is an important first step to make sure that the Northern Ireland traders can continue to move their goods in an unfettered way from the end of the transition period, meeting our clear commitments under the new decade, new approach agreement. But we do recognise that the priority remains to have a regime in place that focuses the benefits on Northern Ireland businesses and ensures that they have a competitive advantage over traders elsewhere on the island of Ireland. This is what the next phase of this regime is going to look at, and we'll provide more information on this. And we will be providing more information as swiftly as possible in 2021 as further details are finalised. And again, I'm sure we'll be talking to you again about this when those details are finalised. I said we'd come back to this. So this is around those importer responsibilities for the Northern Ireland market. If you are a Northern Ireland business selling goods on the Great British market that have been supplied to you as a distributor from the EU market, you will become an importer under Great British rules. So this is where we were talking about people importing to Great Britain can also be classified as being based in Northern Ireland. This is the same as for any business anywhere else in the UK that places goods on the Great British market for the first time. There's also a point to note here that you will become an importer if you are the one bringing goods for the first time into Northern Ireland, either from Great Britain or another non-EU country, and placing them on the Northern Ireland market. So that really summarises our key points here. So this next slide covers lots of the key websites to point you to. So the first here is on placing goods on the Great British market, and that covers the first section of the slides that we spoke through, and also covers those points around the economic operator's legal responsibilities. A good thing to Google here is placing manufactured goods on the market in Great Britain, and hopefully that gov.uk link pops up. The next one is more focused on the UKCA marking and the requirements for that. There's templates for that and images of the UKCA marking. The next one looks more specifically on the placing goods on the EU market. This again has been written from information provided by the EU Commission, and there's a wealth of information on the EU website that you can also use if you have more technical questions about placing goods on the EU market. The next few web addresses here start to look at the Northern Ireland market, and that information that we've discussed. There's lots and lots of information on these pages about Northern Ireland, but again, this is a slightly different rules that apply in Northern Ireland, so happy to take questions on that if you do have them. And finally, and probably the point I want to point you to most, is around this email address, so goodsregulation@bays.gov.uk, and this is taking queries from manufacturers such as yourselves and colleagues within Alex and I's team, working really hard to get answers to those questions as soon as we can. So if your question isn't covered in the Q&A that we're about to move on to, then we'll be more than happy to take them via that email address. Okay, so that is me done, and I think we will be moving on to Q&A.
Thanks very much, Abby. So the first question, does the 2023 sticky label application apply also to the product as well as the packaging?
Alex, I don't know if you want to come in.
Yep, I can answer that one. So yes, so the sticky label can be applied either to the product or an accompanying document. So if you're not permanently fixing the UKCA mark before 2023, then that can be on the product as well as the packaging.
Perfect, thank you. Next question is just looking for a bit of clarity. It says on one of the slides, it says, if you have already placed CE marked goods on the EU or UK market before the 1st of January 2021, you do not need to take any actions for these goods. But the question asked is saying that they've received contradictory advice, saying that all products, even those already on the market with a CE mark, must have a UKCA mark by the 1st of January 2022. Is that correct?
I can come in there and say, no, that's not the case. So goods that have been placed on the market, and the key point is around that placing on the market definition, will not need to be remarked or be certified for placing goods on the UK market. And there's also the provision in place that for most goods, there's that year where CE marks goods, even where that's been done by a UK body, and that's existing stock, continue to be placed on the market until the 1st of January 2022. So hopefully, that's reassuring that the UKCA marking isn't mandatory for most goods from the 1st of January. The only exception is if that good hasn't been placed in the market, and that certification from a UK body is happening after the 1st of January, then that good will need to have the UKCA marking, as that's the only marking that UK-based bodies will be able to apply.
Thank you for the clarification.
Next question. Where the conformity mark also ensures the safety of transport, transport of dangerous goods specifically, what has the UK government done at UN level to ensure they can be recognised by transport authorities?
I'm sorry, for me that was breaking up slightly. I don't know if Alex, if you heard it, I don't know if it's my connection.
Yeah, I think it's one of the questions that was typed in on the Q&A about what the UK government has done on the transport of dangerous goods. We'll have to come back to you on that one. I think that covered by a slightly different team, so we can take that question away and come back with a firm answer. I don't want to give the wrong steer today.
Okay, lovely. Can I put the UKCA and CE marks on the same product? What if there's not enough space for both?
Yeah, so thank you for that question. So this is something that we often get questions about applying both markings. So the key point is that you can apply both markings, so long as the requirements for both markings are being met. Actually, the main crux of this question is if you've got a good that's very small and you cannot fit a single marking or both marking on, what provisions do you have? And the main thing we want to do in this instance is point people to the specific legislation. So as I've mentioned, the requirements that apply for the UKCA will mirror those for the CE marking. And you'll often find in legislation that there will be clauses that say, if your good is too small, there may be other provisions such as applying the CE marking onto packaging, for example, and that will also apply for the UKCA marking. So there may be an instant where your good is too small to fit both markings on. You'll look at the legislation, you find the point that says, yes, this is what you should do in this instance. And then that may mean that the CE or the UKCA marking finds itself on a packaging or an instruction manual or a whole host of other things, a label attached to it. So it's really important to check those sector-specific information. But yeah, just to also reiterate that that is the same as the current requirements for the CE marking, sorry.
Thanks for that. Aaron, maybe just one more question.
Can I use a conformity assessment body outside the UK to certify my goods for the UK market?
Alex, unsure if do you want to come in?
Yeah, so this is, I suppose, if can you use a body outside the UK? So only if the UK has agreed a mutual recognition agreement with that third country, and so you should be able to speak to the relevant conformity assessment body that you're using, and they will be able to tell you if they're certified to apply the UKCA mark. But to be clear, that EU-based notified bodies won't be able to certify for the UKCA mark, but there are some third countries where it is possible, but you should speak to the individual conformity assessment body to confirm.
Thank you.
Thanks very much, Alex and Abby, for that. Any other questions we can answer afterwards offline, and the panelists have very kindly said that they will answer them for us afterwards. So now for our final session from Make UK's Fergus McReynolds and Richard Rumbelow, who will take you through the latest state of play with the EU negotiations. So over to you, Fergus and Richard.
Thank you, Hilary. Thank you to Abby, Alex, and Keith for the earlier sessions. Before I jump into an update on the current state of play in the negotiations and anticipations for the coming week, I just wanted to highlight some of the support services that Make UK has available to companies to help them prepare for the end of the transition period. As has been highlighted a number of times on the call, via the Make UK website, there is access to our EU Exit Hub, and that has a range of guidance, links to the relevant government documentation, and also some of our resources which we prepared throughout this series. As Hilary has highlighted, These sessions have all been recorded, and a copy of those those recordings are available through the Make UK website. In addition, we have a Brexit toolkit that allows you to prepare for some of the customs formalities, allows you to search a database of the UK customs codes, and takes you step by step through some of the requirements in terms of the border formalities. We also, as part of that Brexit toolkit, have a section on people, looking at some of the responsibilities for employing non-UK individuals in the UK, and also business travel to the EU at the end of the year. What I think it's important to stress is that while we are hopeful of a deal being concluded by both parties, even in the event of a deal, there is a lot of change which is coming at the end of this year. We know that this year has been extremely challenging for many in the manufacturing sector, but there are a number of things and steps which we think companies need to take before the end of the year to be ready. In the event of no deal, there will be additional changes, and to try and help companies through that process, we have compiled a checklist. This is a list of questions which we think companies need to ask themselves, and some background guidance explaining why we are asking those questions. It looks at some of your responsibilities in terms of trade and making yourself ready for the customs and border formalities, which will come in any case. It takes you through some of the issues that Keith has already highlighted around understanding your commodity codes, understanding rules of origin, and understanding the potential exposure to tariffs and duties which will be required. It also looks again at people and understanding your responsibilities, and particularly to note here that there will be significant changes to how business travel is conducted into the EU market from the 1st of January next year. It looks at labelling and marking, as we have had on this presentation. It looks at some of your responsibilities around your commercial contracts, and I know that that question has come up in the session already today. And it also looks at some of your responsibilities around data and chemicals regulation. That's available from the Make UK website, and a copy of that checklist will be sent around to all participants, along with a copy of all of the presentations that you have seen today. In terms of an update on the negotiations, as it stands at the moment, both parties are still negotiating. There is no formal deadline on when those negotiations will be concluded, other than we know that on the 31st of December, the UK will leave the customs union and single market more formally, having left the EU on the 1st of February of this year. So, as I mentioned, there will be significant changes coming at the end of the year, whether a deal is concluded or not. The fact that the negotiators are continuing to talk, I think, is a positive sign. There has been a lot of discussion over the course of the last 3 weeks about the outstanding issues, and we do understand from both negotiating sides that a significant content of the agreement has already been drafted, and they are currently negotiating on a number of outstanding issues. Those issues are in terms of how the agreement will be governed and what the governance structure of that agreement will look like. We do understand that progress has been made in this area, but it has yet to be concluded. There is also a discussion on how you ensure fair competition between the two markets, recognizing that what is being sought is an unprecedented relationship in international trade, where tariffs and quotas will be set at a zero rate for UK and EU origin goods. And both parties recognize that there is a need for a mechanism to ensure that in that circumstance, fair competition is observed. Under a classical FTA, you would have measures under the tariff provisions, which in a sense, or in one sense, are designed to try and mitigate between disparities in those markets, differences in the level playing field, as has been referred to in this negotiations for some time. That, we understand, again, has made progress, but still remains unresolved at the top level of the agreement. The final element, which is relevant to perhaps some in the manufacturing sector, but not the vast majority, and that's on the relationship of the fisheries agreement between the EU and the UK. This is about the UK operating as an independent coastal state in control of its waters, but recognising that the historic fishing of those waters by European vessels. That remains a open negotiation. We do understand that movement has been made on that as well, but it has been quoted in the last 24 hours as one of the significant areas where they still haven't found agreement. Those discussions are ongoing, and we recognise the difficulty that this uncertainty is creating for the sector. Make UK has made a number of representations into government at the highest levels to highlight our concern with the ongoing uncertainty in the relationship, and recognising that while some and many and most manufacturers have made preparations for the changes coming at the end of the year, no one will be able to be 100% ready until we actually know the formal nature of that relationship. So that message is received and is being fed into government. There is some speculation that a deal could be concluded over this weekend. I think it still very much hangs in the balance. There are difficult technical issues and difficult political issues for both sides to overcome in order for that deal to be agreed. And I think, as with all Brexit deadlines, the one that matters is the one on the 31st of December. We would like certainty before then, as I'm sure you would, and will continue to push for it. But as it stands, that's the only line in the sand at the moment. Should a deal be concluded in the coming days, we will analyse that and communicate to members what we interpret of that deal. And we have maintained for a long time that a deal at the end of this year is very important. Leaving with no deal would create a large amount of uncertainty and risk a large number of companies not being prepared. At this point, I'll hand over to my colleague Richard Rumbelow, who will take you through some of the issues around wider trade policy. Keith has mentioned this already on his presentation in relation to the continuity agreements that the UK has signed with markets where there was an existing European free trade agreement or preferential trade relations, and Richard will provide you an update on that. And then we are both happy to take any questions from the floor. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Fergus, and good afternoon, everyone. And also thank you to all our other contributors on the session this morning. As Fergus said, I'll just give a very short update on the UK's trade policy as it affects the negotiations that it's pursuing with a number of countries for new free trade agreements, and also in the programme which it is undertaking at the moment to conclude, which is to ensure that trade agreements that we have benefited from by being a member of the EU have a degree of continuity from the 1st of January. In terms of the first part, the UK is in active discussions with 3 country markets at the moment, the US, Australia and New Zealand. The US negotiations commenced in the spring of this year, and as recent speculation suggests, there may be some form of very basic agreement put in place prior to the departure of President Trump from the White House. Any indications of that will come out in the course of the coming days simply because of the timetable in the US. And anything it is likely to happen will be very limited at this stage, maybe around tariffs. But quite clearly, both sides have made undertaking commitments during the course of this year to develop a much more strategic trade agreement. A lot of detail has been discussed between both sides into forming an agreement, but we wait to see the outcome. We wait to see what happens in the new year with the new president in place and what his priority will be for US trade policy going into next year and the year after. So we'll wait to see whether any initial agreement which may be discussed and concluded in the course of the next coming days is taken any further into next year. In terms of Australia and New Zealand, those talks commenced in the summer of this year. There are clearly some strategic priorities for the UK in concluding those separately during the course of next year. In terms of the manufacturing sector, there clearly will be some opportunities to expand trade with both those countries, not just necessarily in the export physical product, but also potentially in relation to services, which is an critical and important part of our manufacturing base. All those discussions are progressing well. They've gone through a number of phases so far. Further phases are planned in the new year. So there could be some expectation that both those agreements will come into force, or certainly have a legal effect maybe during the course of the latter part of next year, but we'll keep you updated on those discussions. What is certain is that next year will be intense in terms of the UK's trade policy objectives. There are a number of other geographical territories and countries that the UK will wish to commence free trade agreements discussions with. Certainly we'll keep you posted on those, as well as the fact that we will be an integral part of those discussions, feeding in your thoughts and comments into what the priorities should be for the UK in those discussions. Finally, in terms of the trade continuity programme, the EU has a number of trade agreements with countries around the world, and for many of you, I'm sure you have benefited from those agreements. Over the course of the last 4 years or so, the UK has been in discussions with those countries to ensure a degree of continuity at the point where the UK formally leaves the European Union, and certainly at the time of the end of the transition period in 2 weeks' time. At the current stage, 58 countries have concluded some form of trade continuity agreement with the UK. A number of those agreements have come through in recent days and weeks. What they will have is some degree, they will have continuity in terms of trade, particularly in key areas such as tariffs, quotas, and other critical issues like that. There are a number of countries which are important to get across the line when it comes to those agreements, and certainly continuity with countries such as Japan, South Korea, and importantly Mexico, which was confirmed this week and is likely to be politically ratified to take legal effect from the 1st of January, have also been concluded too. There are a number of countries where progress on talks has been slow, and it is unlikely that continuity agreements will be in place legally to take effect from the 1st of January. The countries which those affect are on the Department for International Trade website, but just to give you an indication of the countries where that won't happen, will include Algeria, Bosnia, and Serbia, and a number of couple of countries in Africa too, probably Cameroon and Ghana. One notable country, which you may have seen, which has had an agreement confirmed in terms of political signature, is between the UK and Canada. It is now not expected that agreement will come into legal effect from the 1st of January. Both sides are working very intensively to understand how to fill in and make sure that trade continuity can happen in some format from the 1st of January. Advice and guidance from both Canada and the UK will come forward in the next couple of days or so about what those arrangements will be and the mitigations that both will put in place when it comes to the 1st of January and to the period by which that agreement will take legal effect. But it will be some weeks, probably some months before that agreement does actually come into legal effect. For all those countries and for all the information related to how the trade with those countries possibly has changed with those continuity agreements, it is linked on our website. The information is on the Department for International Trade website with all the country relevant topics related to that and where some of the changes potentially have taken place in those continuity agreements. So please do look at our website, but also do look at the Department for International Trade website too. And if there are further changes in any of the agreements which remain outstanding, and certainly for those countries which are still in negotiation in terms of the confirmation of when they will come into legal effect, we will of course update you. That's the end of my summary. Fergus and I will be very happy just to take any further questions in the remaining part of this session. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Richard. I haven't seen any questions come through as of yet, so perhaps I will wrap this session up. Thank everyone for participating today. As we have mentioned, the slides from this presentation will be sent to all participants. We have also taken a recording of this session and a recording of this event will be available to participants and will be available on the Make UK website, along with all of the previous sessions as well. They are broken down into the session by session. So if you're specifically looking at information on the Northern Ireland Protocol, if you're looking at Keith's previous sessions on trade, on special procedures, and today's session, if you're looking for information on data and the provisions for data and data transfers at the end of this year, those sessions are all available on the Make UK website, along with the session on business travel and the movement of people. As I've highlighted, this year has been challenging, and we recognise that there are probably a couple of more challenging weeks to go while companies prepare for the changes. I do want to express that there is quite a lot that companies do need to look at and make sure that they are ready for that. As we have mentioned, there is a checklist on the Make UK website which asks the questions we think that companies should be asking themselves before the end of the year, going through a range of subjects. Make UK will also have a support service over the end of year period, and will be communicating that to all members at the beginning of next week. In the meantime, if you have any inquiries, those can be sent to the Brexit inquiry inbox at Make UK at brexit@makeuk.org. And as has been mentioned, all questions which have been submitted, but which the presenters didn't have time to get round to today, will be answered by email after the session. That just leaves me to thank again all of the panelists today and the presenters today for running through some very important information. I also want to thank Hilary and Aaron, who have done a sterling job in pulling this series of events together. And I want to thank you all for taking the time to join us. And I think we can give you a little bit of your day back. So thank you very much, everyone.